What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Wing and Tail Boys podcast, your Northeast hunting and fishing destination. I'm Chris.
And I'm Angelo.
And we're your hosts. Join us as we navigate the woods and waters of the Northeast, sharing our passion for the outdoors.
Whether it's land management, outdoor recreation, hunting, or fishing, we're going to cover it all. With 40 plus years of experience in the Northeast, we'll provide insights, tips, and stories to help you make the most of your adventures and help you experience the wild.
So, tune in, grab your gear, and let's hit the woods together. And always remember, success is just a commitment away. Hey, what is going on, guys? Thanks for joining us here for another episode of the Wing and Tail Boys. I'm here joined with Dorge of Firenock again today, and we're here recording our second installment of the Arrow series, The Science of Arrow Flight. How you doing today, Dorge?
I'm doing quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you put one down on the ground today, right?
Yep, I did. With my crossbow, and then I just dropped it early again. Just
Right
like
where-
what I did yesterday.
Right where you shot one yesterday too?
Yeah, so I dropped 2 so far.
Okay, good for you. Are those your first 2 for the year, or have you?
Yeah, first 2 for the year because I was in Asia for the first season, and I was letting every single thing walk because I didn't want to deal with it. I come back, one of my customer who run an outfitter say, "Hey, come and kill some does." I said, "Sure, I will go there."
Hey, that's awesome. You can't complain about that, right?
No, just like I saw so many bucks, and just like today I saw a big 8. I say, if it's on public land, I would shot it with a heartbeat.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. My dad's the same way. Like you had said for a little while, you kind of let deer walk because you didn't want to deal with it. My dad's kind of the same way. Last weekend, it was like freaking. The last time we were in the woods, it was like 20 degrees, 18 degrees, wind chill. We were freezing. My dad's like, you got to be out of your mind to think I'm shooting a doe and gutting it. I'm dealing with this for a doe, so.
Well, it's okay. I mean, to be frank with you, if you are going for meat, I always love button. They taste the best. But
Absolutely.
you saw it happen. When you got a freaking button buck and you with no running around, how do you tell?
You're not wrong, and it's funny you say that because my father-in-law is he's like a world famous barbecue cook. Basically, he competed in the world food competitions. He won best burger in the world a couple years ago, and he said, "Chris, I need you to shoot a young one this year so we could do like a rotisserie."
Yes,
so
those taste so much better.
I never got around to that, but
the 3-year-old doe, oh god, they are so gamey.
You know what I found actually takes care of the gaminess? What I like to do is I use a meat tenderizer. Anything that I brine or I season, I like to use a meat tenderizer. And then especially the deer meat, I like to soak it in like a balsamic vinaigrette overnight or even 2 nights in a row if you can for 48 hours straight. If you do it like that, season it, and then smoke it, you don't even know what you're eating. It's just delicious.
Yes, I can imagine that. All right, let's go with our original schedule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
last week, or on the first episode, we talked about the 5 motions of arrow flight. And I don't want to go into what they are again. Hopefully our listeners either listen to that last week or, after listening to this, they'll go back and listen to it. But just to recap, we talked about stuff like parabolic motion, torsion, center ovalization, circular expansion and contraction, and microflex. Those are the 5 motions that an arrow makes simultaneously as it's going down range and affects the way an arrow flies. Today, what we're doing is we're kind of transitioning from how the arrow behaves or what the arrow is or what's being done to the arrow essentially to the stages that it goes through as it flies. What's happening to the arrow from the moment it leaves the bow to the moment it impacts?
Yes, that's a good one. Because I think a lot of people do not really understand it. And also, each of the stages, the arrow actually behave very differently based on design and how you set it up. The front of center, the power cycle, the draw length have a major effect. That's the reason. Just because somebody have a good arrow based on their setup, it does not work in any other formation. Just simply a person say 70 pound, 30-inch draw, it don't mean anything. Until it tell you the cam, the broadhead FOC, the size of the arrow, all those would impact. Just like, when let's put something further back. Just talk about the stages of how the arrow react when you shoot it. See, when the arrow first got, imagine this, I have to use something like let's go with the 80% let off, which is what most people use right now. The moment you let go of that release, your power curve is going to say, I will use 70 pound, 80% off. That means at that moment, that is only 14 pound on the knot. Then within, say, your cam should be doing something like a 3 to 5 degree turn. It will instantly, because you're passing that let off curve. That very moment, your arrow power that was exerted to the knot will from 14 pound all the way jump to 70 pound. Now, remember, you got weight in the front of the arrow. The arrow is now being compressed. The law of motion applies. That weight in the front is going to resist the power.
Right.
So what do you think is going to happen every shot? The arrow flash is going to bend.
Absolutely, because it takes more force to get that heavier object in the front to start moving.
Now, instead, it's an archery. Let me just put it this way: instead, an archery projectile, the arrow or the whole arrow move forward regardless of that. Answer is yes. Those are called bolts. The moment your arrow bends when it launches, those are arrows.
So is that a technical difference, or is that
yes,
your?
That's actually a technical difference.
Okay.
So when people say I shoot a crossbow arrow, they're absolutely correct. Unless you go into something like a 13, 14 inch that the arrow technically do not bend. Now you're shooting a bow. A lot of people think that by putting vanes on a boat, they will make it into an arrow. No, it is the reaction of the shaft reacting to bend and also the flex and the compression that makes it an arrow.
Wow! See, we got a nice little bonus bit of information today. That's
but
cool.
You know what? If you really boil down to it, does a boat still react to that to a certain extent? On the traditional, like on the say a Ming Dynasty crossbow arrow, answer is no, because the whole thing move forward in straight forward. So those are an absolute bow. In today's, when we shoot a carbon crossbow arrow, I do call them a crossbow arrow. They do not behave like a bow. They actually behave more like a.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I never so it's always been explained to me that the difference between an arrow and a bolt is the size. Once you get under, say, 16 inches, it's no longer an arrow; it's a bolt. That's kind of how it's always been explained to me.
See, this is where the major difference between a traditional arrow, which is a recurve-based arrow, recurve-based launch cycle, compared to the compound bolt power cycle. See, when you do 0% let off, when you're holding 100 pounds, that means the moment you let go, the 100 pound is onto the arrow and the power decreases. But in the case of a high let off, in order to be high let off, the power cycle, the duration of the power cycle is where the problem is. It's not that the arrow can't react to the power, as the power is now continuous and prolonged. Now your spine rating has to go up in order to resist it.
And that's up from the traditional thought.
Correct.
So
because it's not just bending it. Because in case you say the 70 pound, 20% off, you're holding 14 pounds. Then 14 pounds jumps straight to 70 pounds, right? Well, guess what? That 70 pounds is going to prolong the duration and then come down. You look at every single archery magazine, they will tell you the power cycle. They all look, technically, all the good ones have a plateau.
Like a flat part at the top.
Right. What do you think that's doing? It's applying the 70 pounds for that duration of time.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So, how do I want to pose this question? So then, backtrack for a second, because basically what you're saying is that the higher the let off, the less weight you're holding at full draw. But the more the instantaneous change in energy.
The transition is much longer, and the duration of force is also longer.
Okay, so I'm just going to come out and say, I shoot a Darton bow right now, and my last bow was a Hoyt. And I got to say that their draw cycles were very, very similar, where it never really felt stacked in the front or the back, and it felt very consistent from beginning to end. Now, what I found I love most in my Hoyt, and now even more so my Darton, is they're the only two bows I've ever had where at any point drawing back I can stop and hold it, or at any point in letting down I can stop and hold it. And that actually, excuse me, that actually came in handy this year when I drew on a doe. I ended up having no shot, and when I went to go let down, she kind of looked in my direction, and I was caught at like a quarter of a draw, and I was just stuck there, and I was worried I wouldn't be able to hold it. I've never done that before, and it was no problem. I was there for like 30 seconds just holding it, and I couldn't
Well,
believe that.
this is where the cam design come in. The smoother you feel is the rounder the cam. The more dramatic you feel is called a power cam.
Yeah,
Now, if you are old enough like me, you will remember back in the 1980s and 90s, when you look at arrow chart, you don't look at poundage only. You look at the cam. It's a hard cam, a soft cam, a round wheel, or no cam, which is a traditional. What happened to that whole section? That section is gone,
it's
isn't
gone. I've never seen that before. I've
it?
never
Ask
seen
yourself
that kind
this
of chart
question.
before.
If we do a hard cam, which means that it jump from small into high. But see, right now we are so good at manipulating the cam. That let off, just like when you pull a Hoyt all the way on the final end, you all of a sudden, zoop. What do you think? What do you think that is?
That's
That is
that.
actually a hard cam, but they transit it so smoothly.
Yes, and what I found, so the reason why I was starting to pose the question the way I was, is that we're saying that when you have an arrow that starts off light, and then plateaus for a while and then comes down, right? That causes more of a problem than just allowing it to either be right, instantaneous, or to
No,
be
instantaneous and then decrease
right.
because it is a. But see, right now with all the highlight of bow, the holding is short, so instantly that moment you release it, the arrow is like not doing much to full power being applied. So the arrow is start to flex and torque at the same time because of the momentum, the inertia in the broadhead or the field point. As the force being applied consistently, not consistently, the duration increases. The arrow now had to resist the entire duration. In the old ways, we just barely hit the top and then we go down. Now the top is plateaued, which means that the force applied to the arrow is not just a force, not a static force. It's not a dynamic force, but a continuous for a duration of time force.
Okay.
Which means that the arrow had to work a lot more.
And that's funny because we don't think of our arrow working. We think of the bow working and the arrow just moving.
No. Remember the arrow itself, the arrow with heavy FOC, the arrow had to flex more. That means the magnitude of flex will increase.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, as the magnitude increases, now you got another problem. That means the recovery is going to be longer.
You're getting ahead of ourselves here, Dorge.
Well, but I'm just simply because those are exactly where the steps is. Because see, we're talking the power cycle. But the reaction of the power cycle is how the power is being applied. Then we also have to see how the arrow going to react to that power because the power is not even. Depends on what a traditional bow, a round cam, a hard cam, a high let-off cam, an ultra high let-off cam. You look at the power curve; they are not the same. If the power curve is not the same, how do you expect the arrow to react the same?
Right. Okay. Now I'm with you. I hadn't realized that we jumped into the first two stages of flight.
But they interact. You cannot say because see when the power cycle coming in, we're talking the power coming in. But the next important thing is that the arrow had to react to that power. But I need to sort of explain what each of the cam and behavior of the cam and how the arrow is going to react to it.
Okay.
Because the whole process, these two had to, just like action and reaction, that's exactly what it is. The action is the power cycle. The reaction of time is how the arrow reacts to the power.
Okay.
Your inertia, momentum all kicked in.
Right. Now I'm with you. So just to what's the word I'm looking for here?
Summarize.
Well,
Clarify.
I want to clarify that. That's the word I'm looking for. I just want to clarify for the listeners here that the 5 stages that we're talking about here are the power cycle, the reaction to power. So the power cycle, essentially, now that we've talked about it, is how is the power coming from the bow? How is the power being sent to the arrow, essentially?
Yeah, transfer. That's the best word.
The reaction to the power is essentially how the arrow reacts to how the bow is transferring the energy. Then we go into recovery and stabilization, and then ending with the impact, which in turn transitions into penetration.
Right.
So
the impact and penetration is two different things. A lot of people do not understand because we'll get there when we reach there.
Yeah. Okay. So to summarize, the power cycle of the bow essentially is: what is the draw cycle like on the bow? How does it stack the energy? And then how does it release the energy back? Essentially.
And the rate of release and the duration of release will impact on how the arrow going to react to it.
Okay.
And the way you build the arrow will have total different reaction.
Now,
that's where the difference is.
Is this why, like this phenomenon, this concept of the power cycle and the reaction to power, is this why target or competition bows are so much less aggressive? Because competition bows, their cams are almost perfectly round. They're not the fastest bows in the world. They're obviously nice and long, so you can hold a little bit better on the target. But are they designed that way because of the issues that a power cycle causes?
Yes and no. First of all, I know I jump myself. First of all, we're dealing with target arrows. They're significantly larger in size.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
Unless you're dealing with USA Archery or some of the NFAA on the super thin stuff. But remember, those things are usually on a round cam. You don't really go into hard cams, and they're also low poundage. Because like the few of my pro staff would shoot NFAA, they're shooting 40-pound class with a 37-inch XO PSC preform X on a 600 spine set. That's what they're doing.
I got you.
But then they're always shooting the 166, not because of the way they hunt or the way they target shoots. I mean, if you shoot target and not afraid of arrow breakage, the 315 or the 2264 or 2364 is the way to go. But you can't do that when you start stacking like 10, 5 arrows. You're going to break every one of them.
Right.
And you end up with no arrow before the first.
Right, and a lot of those guys too, it should be mentioned that a lot of those guys are shooting. Vegas is like a 3 spot. Other competitions have a 5 spot. So sometimes they don't have to stack the arrows; they're just shooting at individual circles.
All right,
and
those are
and
right. Those, but in most cases, like the NFAA, the largest size is 2364.
Yeah, and the truth is, the target guys like to shoot bigger arrows because it gives them a little bit more of a margin of error.
Actually, that was minor. Is how the arrow reacts correctly. Because in this reason, the reaction to power is not a big deal. Because remember on the last episode, the ovalization.
Yes.
Where it really did a big deal. And the recovery. Those two are the biggest factor, a large arrow.
So see that this is kind of throwing me through a loop here, because do they know this? Like, did the target guys know that the fatter arrows react better? Like, did they know about center ovalization? Because I feel like I haven't heard about it until I started speaking with you.
Not just that, the center ovalization and the larger size is the recovery rate. But then, is it really that big an arrow? If you think about it, in the old days, what's the 2219? It's a Go-Tip 22. It's 22/64 of an inch OD.
Okay.
That's pretty much what everybody uses because that is such a good size. But when you move to carbon, you actually got a little bit faster, a little bit more strict material. But then, like the first Beeman, the only reason it was designed like that because they're using linear carbon fiber. Using such thing more, you got to break every time you touch it. It's a matter of construction and matter of reliability. Well, let me go back to what we talk about today. Remember how the arrow behaves? The design of the arrow, the material arrow, and how the arrow construction is going to change totally based on that reaction to power.
Yes.
And let me just be blunt. The higher the let off, the larger diameter you should use.
Okay.
The higher the spine do not help you because it makes the arrow lazier. That means your reaction to power is going to be lazy. Then your recovery is going to be longer.
Right. So do do we want our arrow to flex then? We just want to be able to
Absolutely.
control
But
the
you want
flex.
it to stop flexing as soon as possible.
Right.
Now, let me give you based on what I have experienced, okay? Back in 1990, when everybody is shooting just transfer 2019 and now ACC 360s into ACC 349 into, say, the Beemans. The biggest deal about it is that the reaction of the arrow is significantly improved. And the size of the arrow also decreases, which makes a lot of people happy. But remember, at that time, everybody is shooting round cams. And it's hard to get a hard cam. Because see, your so-called highlight up is still at 65% let off.
Right. Honestly, I wish more companies offered the 65% let off.
PSC
I really
does.
do.
I mean, then now, give you an idea. This is the numbers I discovered. Assuming you're shooting 70-pound, 30-inch draw, say on a set on 80% off. If you shoot a 22-19, you should recover around 16 yards.
Mm-hmm.
On a carbon, say a typical Carbon Express Maxima, you're going to take about 18 yards.
Okay.
When you start shooting a 204, I'm assuming that everybody is shooting not crazy FOC, we're shooting between 8 to 10% FOC.
Okay.
Not even 12.
A semi-balanced, a pretty balanced
The word
arrow.
is balanced.
Okay.
On the 2404, you're looking around 20 yards. The moment you go to 166, the minimum number is 23.
So the thinner the arrow, the longer it takes for it to recover.
Correct.
Essentially. Okay.
And higher the let off, the longer it takes to recover.
Okay. So when I was going through this list, because you and I spoke a couple weeks ago, and we kind of laid out the first 5 episodes or so, or how we want to kind of start this and then see where it goes. And as I was making the show notes for this episode and kind of putting things together, I got to recovery and stabilization. And I stopped for a second and I said, a good question to ask would be, what's the difference between the two? Like,
yep, I just give it to you. The higher the let off, the longer it takes to stabilizer. The thinner the arrow, the longer it takes to stabilize. The higher the FOC, the longer it takes to stabilize and recover. And as you increase the front of center, you also increase the magnitude of the parabolic action. So that's the reason a really high performance, high level compound bow should have the lowest FOC possible to give you the best performance. But it was the most unforgiving to shoot.
Right. And as we all know, a deer doesn't take the step when you want him to take the step, or doesn't walk out from behind that tree when you want him to. And we all want to be able to hold the bow for as long as we can.
That's the reason. You notice for the last 2 years, so I mentioned so many. You can look at some of the YouTube pages. You've got a guy with an 85% let off, at least 70-pound, 29-inch draw, shooting like a deer, say, 40 feet. The arrow will only go in about 3 inches and stop.
Now, is that because it didn't recover, or because it didn't stabilize? Because
all of the above.
So, I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, when I think of recovery, I think, okay, the arrow flexed. How long does it take for it to stop flexing? But to me, that also kind of sounds like stabilization.
Correct, because the arrow have to hit the arrow will never have equilibrium because it's in motion. Okay.
Okay.
Second, the arrow will never stop flexing. So in the arrow will go into what you call a tumbling eclipse, right? Elliptical spin. That means the arrow in final stage after about 40, about say 20, 25 yards, the arrow will do a very tight elliptical spin. I think in the old days we got a reasonably perfect spin. And now all arrows have an elliptical spin. Do you know why? Except aluminum arrows.
Oh, okay. And is it because of the way the arrows were made, the extruded versus not? Okay.
Because the arrow now do not have a linear spine. You have an elliptical, a helix or compound helix spine.
Right. Where and essentially, so when we think of a spine, just to clarify for the listeners, when we think of a spine of the arrow, we think of a spine like our body. It starts at 12 o'clock, it ends at 12 o'clock, and runs straight down.
Correct.
The top of the arrow. But the spiral, it literally spirals around the shaft.
That's the reason if anybody give you an arrow marked with a spine, the moment you put an inch cut on it, the spine will move left or right, based on construction.
So are they actually spine aligned though? When they're 32 inches, when they put them in the box?
We do. In most cases, whoever told me their spine alignment is simply a matter of pictures, labels. Because
Okay.
I mean, yes, some people really do that. I know some manufacturer when they told you that arrow is spine aligned, like K-Max when their crossbow come out, they are in this spine aligned. They spine align the dynamic spine of the shaft and they mark it, and that's how they put the coupling. But the case of a normal, regular compound bow, you cannot. Because when they spine align it, they're based on 32 inch. You're not going to shoot a 32 inch. The moment you cut it, the arrow spine is going to move left or right. I prove that in ATA show every time. You can put a 32 inch shaft. You make the 27 axle to axle measurement. You put your arrow to the left. You got a spine marking. You put the rest to the right. You got another spine marking, and they are not on the same spot.
Right.
And the one who give you the same spot usually are your aluminum arrows. Some of the ACCs are fully optimized carbon arrows. So far, I own the patent to the arrow wheel. That is the only optimized linear spine shaft. Because on every single shaft, you know how they actually have that? Because the shaft actually torque.
That's right. And we talked about in the last episode where the front turns one way and the back turns the other, and they're kind of doing
Why do they
one
turn?
of these.
Because the spine is not linear. Because if the spine linear only, then the arrow will go flex up and down. They will not twist. Because the spine is actually a helix or a compound helix.
And I will also say, not only do your arrows fly very nicely, man, can they take a beating.
Well, I don't have that 7 years patent on the arrow shaft for no reason.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this is another thing. When we talk about recovery, as I just mentioned, on the 166, it takes the longest to recover, not because of it's not a matter of power. It's simply a matter of wall thickness.
Right.
The thicker the wall, the lazier the arrow, the longer it takes to recover.
And again, just to because I think it just clicked in my head. When an arrow recovers, it is almost no longer flexing. It's never stops flexing, but it's close to not flexing.
Correct. Because remember, you also still have microflex. The microflex usually happens in the first 30 yards.
Right.
After that, microflex should no longer be on it. Right. Because microflex is one of the biggest parasitic loss on an arrow flight, especially high power compound bow or crossbows.
And you and I have talked a lot about that, and that's one of the big things that I've focused on in the last year within my setup. And then the stabilization essentially is getting the arrow to as close of a perfect spin as possible. Okay.
Right. Now, this is the part that a lot of people did not know. So what is the flex on what is the stabilization spin? So how much is the arrow flexing?
How much is the arrow flexing in rotation?
Mm-hmm.
Infinite, isn't
it? About 25 to 70 thousandths of an inch based on the 246.
Oh, you're talking about the magnitude of the flex?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got you.
Now, this is where the funny part is. If the arrow at any condition is going to do that amount of flex, what does the strictness have to do with it?
What does the thickness have to do with it?
The strictness.
Oh, I already know the answer to this question. It does nothing. If you're talking about the difference between what they consider elite arrows at 1/1000th of an inch and the sportsman arrows that are at 3,000th of an inch or 5,000th of an inch, I mean, you're talking like what, 3 papers, maybe?
No, the problem is that when the arrow is flexing that much, just be absolutely. I want people to really think about it.
Okay.
If your arrow is flexing, say 1,000th thickness, and when you shoot the arrow, the center portion of the arrow, especially I saw that on slow camera on the 6-700 spine, it's going to flex over 3 inches.
So that difference of 3,000ths of an inch is literally a null point because it's already flexing that much anyway.
But in the old days, when you are shooting a not high level compound bow, when the diameter is pretty good, you are using the technical specification of strictness to tune the arrow instead of learning how to dynamically tune the arrow.
Okay.
Now, people like Tim Gillingham, Levi, and Dan McCarthy, the first thing they tell you, shoot through paper. What are they really telling you? They want to see how the arrow cut the paper to realign the arrow to the spine that they want to shoot.
Right.
Especially in bash. So the vein is not an issue.
Yeah, no, and I will not shoot a arrow setup until I paper tune my arrows. I won't do it. And just a little bit of a spoiler alert, and I know this is, I mean, probably maybe 10 episodes from now, but the beautiful thing about the arrows that we're going to get to talking about, Arrow Concept 1, Arrow Concept 2, the beautiful thing about them is it takes a lot of that extra work out of the equation. It takes a lot of, like, yeah, I still paper tune my bow. I still paper tune my arrow, but I don't shoot every single arrow through paper anymore to make sure that every single arrow is aligned, because when you follow the system, you're already spine aligning your arrows anyway.
Well, so let's go back to the stabilization.
Yes.
So what stabilization means? That means the arrow now, instead of flexing with a huge amount of parabolic and a huge amount of vibration, and not to mention the torsions are pretty much handled, and then the vein is taking control, the arrow is doing a very tight elliptical spin and flying in the air. Okay?
Okay. So
that is the stabilization stage.
Gotcha. So
now,
it's when the arrow is able to minimize as much of what we talked about in the last episode. That is when the arrow reaches, quote, stabilization.
Now this is where the tricky part is.
Okay.
If you shoot a 166, it takes about 23 yards. If you shoot a 2219, it takes 16 yards. So if you happen to shoot an animal, say, 16 yards, the arrow is not stabilized.
Right.
The moment you anchor the front, what do you think is happening to the back? Yep, then where is the vector of the energy going? Not forward, it goes sideways. The penetration just like you can forget about it.
The way I like to think about it is like if you were to take something and try to slip it through a hole, and then as you're putting it through a hole, you start you kind of like pull it one way, let it, it's not gonna go in, and it's gonna stop moving before it gets it. I think of it's funny that we talk about this. I used to shoot heavy FOC, heavy arrows. That's what I used to shoot. And it used to penetrate steel drums, no problem. But the arrow would only go 4 or 5 inches in and then just hang. And you can literally hear it as it's entering that steel drum.
But if you shoot that thing at 40, 50 yards, it will penetrate a lot better because the arrow stabilized. You need to know your setup. Just especially for a few customers who told me they're going to shoot elk. The first thing I told them, are you stalking or you are just simply sitting on the blind waiting for it? If you're stalking, what happens? You say it's 15 feet in front of you. I mean, let me give you how the extreme. I got one of my customers who is a retired ranger. He shot an elk with a crossbow at 9 feet because he was that good. The arrow hit the elk and exploded in 7 pieces.
Really?
Yes.
And
no
did
joke. It was my arrow on top of it.
And did he hit bone, or did it just?
No,
it was just too close.
Because the arrow was so much power. He was shooting a sculpted Oculus Orion Extreme. And the arrow goes in, but the back of the arrow is still flexing. That's the reason. Never decock a crossbow like within 10 feet. You're putting so much stress to the arrow shaft. Usually, what you end up with is the arrow going to crack right in front of the ring.
Okay. See, and we used to use the decocking arrows. You know, the ones that they, it had like the blunt tip on it. You could like shoot it into the dirt and then just go and pick it up.
Yeah, but that's a different, because in most cases those arrows are made of fiberglass. They're meant to do that. Yes. I mean, if you remember, if you have the old days when we're shooting demons, if you hit something really hard, the back of your arrow on the beam explode, will flare. The adapter will fly out and the nut's gone. Because all the energy had to flow out somewhere.
It's got to come out of somewhere. And if the arrow's no longer moving, then that energy's got to get transferred somewhere else.
Because it's already anchored in the front, so it just explode the whole thing on the front.
Right. Okay.
Action and reaction. Remember, it's not a simple action and reaction. It's a complex reaction. But when you reach a certain stage with so much more power, ridiculous thing would happen. It's just reason, I told most of my customers who started archery, I say, don't get the fastest bow. Drop your arrow around 260, 270 per second. You got a lot less headache. The stuff is so mature, you will not have a problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question, but it would be getting a little off topic. So we're gonna save that one.
But see, this is which blend into our original conversation. When you impact something, that is where a lot of the mechanical broadhead with a high let off, with the heavy FOC have problems.
Yes.
Because you imagine this. If you're shooting a single bevel, okay, and your arrow, the point of impact of your arrow happen on the same axis of the blade, then what happened to the arrow? The arrow is now going in, the arrow will be like a knife cutting sideways.
Yes.
What happened to your KE? Your KE is moved in going sideways. Your arrow shaft now it will push the blade sideways and do a shallow cut.
And that's for what kind of broadhead now?
For a single bevel.
Okay.
Because remember, single bevel, the arrow on a single bevel still flex.
Mm-hmm.
And you are you're shooting an animal in the recovery stage.
Right. And now we're talking sub 20 yards, essentially, is what we're talking.
Yes, in most cases.
Okay.
In sub 20 yards. And then imagine your single bevel hit the animal. Now it's a big deal. In which way does the arrow and the broadhead behave on the point of impact? Because you need to know which way the arrow is flexing when the impact point of the broadhead was in it. Imagine, I'm going to just do two scenarios because it gets too complicated. Assuming the flex on the point of impact is the same axis as the blade. That means assuming the blade is at 12 and 6 o'clock, and the arrow is also flexing at 12 and 6 o'clock. The moment it go in, the arrow will go down like a knife.
Because that's the way everything is moving.
Correct. But remember, It's not just that. The arrow also has torsion and flex, so it go in a little bit weird. Mm-hmm. So right now, just simply, we're going to ignore all the rest of the force because otherwise we're never able to get this message across. Mm-hmm. Assuming at that moment we're still in the original parabolic actions of the arrow shaft. Mm-hmm. So the moment it goes in, at 12 and 6 o'clock, it's going to cut at 12 and 6 o'clock. Now the arrow is going to go down or up with the blade. And hopefully there's enough energy behind it on the same axis of the frontal part of the arrow. You now got decent penetration.
Okay. And
but it's still less.
And decent at best is what we're getting at.
Right. But imagine if your arrow impact and the flex of the arrow at that moment is on the 9 and 6 o'clock. What do you do now? You go in, you're wedging the arrow blade into the meat. Mm-hmm. Now you have no penetration.
Right, and that's even worse.
Right. But then you say, with the 3-blade, in 90% of the time, you're able to go in, 4-blade will go in. The 2-blade is the worst case scenario.
And that's just simply because that actually makes sense. Because when a 2-blade only has one plane, if everything isn't
anything
working
besides that plane won't work, you're gonna have less.
And at least with the 3-blade or a 4-blade, it's almost like a triangle or a rectangle where if it wants to kick one way, you have that other edge to kind of keep it on the path of the way it's going.
Now, that's saying that's the impact. Now, you technically look at the impact and the penetration; they come together. Because see, if the arrow have a long, fast flight, is stabilized and so on, of course, your final vector of the arrow is going in.
Right.
But if you have all the tail end with all the vectors going left, right, up, down, whatever, plus torsion. Actually, torsion is one of the bigger deals for some of the not so good arrows. Because imagine your arrow is flexing left, right based on torsion. The moment you hit, you stop. Which way is the arrow turning? Linearly, based on torsion.
Would it be the way the back of the arrow is moving?
You do not know. Answers.
Oh, it was a trick question.
No, it's not, because the condition is whatever the arrow design and build and flex, all of them combined. Okay. So you do not know. In other words, it's a crapshoot. So the only thing left is that you want the arrow to be long enough to stabilize. The vein is doing a very nice elliptical spin to the arrow shaft, and then you got a reasonably strict penetration. Just like I always use this analogy. Imagine you're holding a knife, you cut a tomato. Give yourself 2 degrees to that knife. Cut it down. What do you think he's going to cut? He's not going to cut. He's going to use a lot more effort.
Right.
Now imagine if the arrow is flexing, just say 2 degrees. What do you just do to the broadhead? You give the broadhead 2 degrees before penetration.
Right. So the way I'm kind of thinking about this, and I'm going to try to use. We've talked cars before. We've talked some other stuff before. So I'm going to use a sports analogy here if I can. I used to run track when I was younger. I was a sprinter. I ran the 100-meter dash. And anyone who knows what the 100-meter dash is, it's just a straight run. Okay? The way I think of it is the straighter I run, the more energy that I'm retaining and pushing towards the finish line and pushing towards the goal. Now think about how silly it would sound if instead of running a straight line, I started zigzagging and like a rabbit does. You know, I would lose energy. It would take me longer to get down to the end. And by the time I got there, I'd have nothing left. So essentially now to bring these 5 stages of aeroflight together, we want to make sure that the power cycle is working for us and not against us, right? And again, the faster the bow, I believe you said the faster the bow is, the lower you want the let off to be to help out with that change, right? The aggressiveness.
Depends on the arrow design.
Right.
Just like I just talked to another customer of mine, he was asking me, can I help him on a new arrow design? Because he was having such hard time with the 166. He said, well, under that condition, we just up the spine. I said, sure. You are moving the arrow from an arrow to a boat. So the entire energy transfer is going to be less. Because a boat is the most inefficient transfer, but have the highest momentum.
Inefficient? You said it's the most inefficient transfer?
Inefficient.
Is that because it doesn't flex?
There's no transition.
Okay. Wow.
But remember, 90% of the boat, because you're using a very heavy projectile.
Yes.
Just like in the traditional Chinese crossbow, when you use a crossbow, guess what you're slinging? You're slinging a 4 to 6 ounces piece of steel with a tip on it. So the entire projectile is coming off. That means now your energy can slowly build up because the arrow, the bow don't flex. All the energy is slowly transferred to the bow and go. But when you want a very, very fast transfer of energy, something had to, just like you want the best car and you have no suspension. You think you're going to go into a corner?
Fast car, no suspension?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not going to take those turns very well.
No, you won't even take the turns. But at the same time, when you put a suspension, your initial velocity will be lower because energy is wasted in the suspension. But the suspension is absolutely needed. That's the same thing with arrows. The arrow, you need to flex. But you want the arrow to recover as fast as possible because the longer it recovers, the more energy wasted.
Yes.
It's a pure parasitic loss of energy.
Right. To exacerbate that, if it's still flexing at impact, I mean, almost all of that energy is escaping out the back before it even...
Or simply going the wrong direction, because then you have multiple vectors that you do not want to deal with.
And like you said, I think it was in the last episode when we were talking, you said you want your arrow to behave like a pile driver, where the front of your arrow essentially is... Right. And the front has the cutting apparatus, while the back transfers the energy to that cutting apparatus.
Correct.
And the straighter it goes the straighter it impacts, and the less it's flexing at impact, the easier and the better an arrow can transfer its energy from back.
Let me just give you an idea so you can definitely think through a process. Imagine you've got a 10 train car.
Yes.
And the train is going to collide into a hill, and the road is straight. All the force is going to, what do you call it? You're going to truncate and cascade into the front. The force is still going to apply the front. Imagine now you're going to have this 10 cart, and you're going to put a curve on it. Not very deep curve, just a shallow curve. Guess what happened in impact? I would guarantee a few carts were going to go off the track.
Absolutely.
So where is the kinetic and potential energy those cars have? Where is it going? Not to the front.
Into space.
Into lava.
Yeah, exactly.
So if imagine this, now you have a curve that's close to 90 degrees, and the front of the car, the train hit the hill, the stop. More than half of it will go off the track. I'll tell you. So how much is the impact force on the front? Now
Less.
imagine this. Your arrow is doing the same thing. The moment when the train hits, the rest of the arrow should point to the same direction where the force is, so they can all stack against to the front. If the arrow is in any form of flexing, the energy is not going forward, it's going somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And you don't really care where it is, because it is not what you want.
Right. And can I tell you, I've told you, I used to listen to the Deer Gear podcast. I've heard a lot of different conversations where you have talked about some of this stuff, maybe from a different perspective. That train example that you just gave is the best example of this concept that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
When it's going straight, the only place the energy has is to go straight.
So the entire stack is going in.
Exactly. That's incredible.
Let me explain to you another thing. Imagine this. If you want to go against this phenomenon, you can adjust the weight of the train all the way to the front. Am I right? So if you lose the last 5 cars and most of the weight is in the front, so when you impact it, the effect is less.
Right. So we're assuming, and this goes back to, like you were saying, 8 to 10% FOC, a balanced arrow. If the weight in each of the cars is relatively equal or balanced from the first car to the last car, it's different than if you were to it would with the train going around the bend, it would react differently than if you had most of the weight in the first 3 cars and less weight in the last 7, so to speak.
Right. Now,
okay.
In that concept, it is a way to compensate. But if the arrow is correct and straight, and you have the weight evenly over the entire train, the force is stacked one after the other.
Right.
It is not just simply one touch and you're at the end of it. No,
right.
It's what. See, the beauty of an arrow shaft in perfect balance flight is that when the arrow go in, the rest of the arrow will keep pushing it going forward.
Yes.
But see, on a super heavy FOC arrow in a long range flight, the moment you touch it, all the way in the front, that's all you need. It behaves more like a spear. It's no longer an arrow.
Okay. So for our listeners who traditionally prefer to shoot a heavier arrow.
No, heavy arrow is totally fine.
Right. And that's what I was...
Just not heavy FOC.
Right, and that's what I was getting at.
Like, I remember my conversation with McKinney, before I really dig into this first, I consider the most knowledgeable archery dynamic expert. I mean, Rick McKinney had won enough tournaments. I respect the guy immensely. I mean, he do it, but his theories are based on what he did and what he had done and what he had encountered. But remember, all his work stopped technically in 2005.
Why is that?
That's exactly what happened. I don't know why, but that's pretty much what did. Because of 2005, there's no more new arrows. That was the last. His hippo and his orca. That's it. There's no more.
Okay.
But then, if you think about back then, I learned from him. If I really want good penetration, fast recovery, the carbon rhino is the best. Except I got a little bit speed penalty. But the downside with the carbon rhino is that you can shoot the next 10 years with that 2,000 arrow.
Yeah. So I got a couple questions here, kind of just comparing some of what we talked about last week to this week. So when we were talking last week about the 5 motions of the arrow flight, we said if you want to, I believe we said if you want to avoid as much of this as possible, shoot a fatter diameter arrow and don't hit 270 feet per second. And if you're shooting a fatter arrow and your arrow is traveling under 270 feet per second, you don't have to worry about it.
Oh, yeah. Actually, you see, a lot of my customer who just got new archery and they say they bought a new Hoyt, a lift, a Matthew lift, or something like the brand new Elite. You know what I told them? You want to hunt? You want to kill stuff? You start fooling around with the arrow design. As long as you're shooting under 30-inch or 29-inch 70 pounds, get the simplest gold tip 22, which is a 2264 arrow, and shoot that thing. It will be the best arrow you ever asked, and you will kill everything in sight. And that is the minimum tuning abilities.
Okay. So for those of you who like simple and basic, get yourself whatever bow you want. 70 pounds, under 29.5 inch, under 270 feet per second, and you're good to go.
And
Now,
then remember, the Gold Tip 22, you may have to put a little bit weight in front because the Gold Tip 22 is a very light arrow.
okay.
And it's cheap, and you can build it very simply.
Okay.
And you will not go through the extreme tuning headache. I mean, yes, that arrow will give you pretty much everything you did. Can you do better? Yeah, you may still go back to something like 246, but your headache will a lot less because you're not screwing around with those exceptionally crazy inserts just to make it work.
Okay. Now these to piggyback on the last thing, or to kind of I guess continue where I was going with that, the 5 stages, the stuff that we're talking about today, can they also be avoided with the same arrow, or are we going to experience the 5 things that we talked about today regardless of the arrow we're shooting?
Well, in most cases, it depends more or less.
Okay.
Because most of the new bow are in the 80 to 85 percentile. So the larger diameter size will definitely react much better. And because it's larger, it might recover a lot faster.
Okay.
When it recovers faster, it stabilizes faster because of larger diameter, which will now allow the arrow to be straighter faster, which
Okay.
means it will give you a better impact and then give you better penetration. They all stack on top of each other.
I got you. So this is really, really specific to people like myself or you. I'm a speed junkie. I love speed, but I never want.
I mean, the downside with that Gold Tip 22 is that if you shoot it exactly as is, you can easily hit 315. Now you may have to tune your bow down a little bit. You see, that arrow will be fantastic if you shoot something like a 60 pound. When you start shooting 70 pound, that arrow is a little bit difficult to shoot. But at least if you decide to shoot animal at say 16 yards, you will behave like a 166 shooting at 23 yards.
Okay. All right.
Can you do more? Absolutely. But we need 2 more episodes before we go into that.
Yeah. Oh man, you already know I'm like foaming at the mouth to get to the arrow building, man. That's like I love that stuff. I love working with my hands. I love building things. And the arrow build and everything that goes into it just fascinates me. And
yeah, but you need to, just like all this stuff we talked about today and the last time, I need to get the foundation knowledge built before we go into, okay, you decided you're going to use a specific size arrow. Now let's talk about how to make it work.
Right.
Because remember, you can always make something work if you put enough effort. It may not be the easiest, but it will work as long as you are willing to put enough effort. Effort is not just time. It's money, it's resources.
Mm-hmm. I learned that the hard way.
And unfortunately, I'm an engineer by education, and I know if that is the result. Like money, no object, time, no object, effort, no object. Give me what I need because I want that. Okay. I mean, it's like, how do I say it? I remember the first marketing course I have I remember the first professor say, when a lady walked into a car dealership, the first thing the car salesman is what color you like. Because for them, that is the most important thing. When a guy looked like a gearhead junkie, they go, we're talking about carburetors, we talk about tires, suspension, gearbox. But then I will share with one story from Professor Selig. He said you can design the world's best airplane. If it doesn't look good, you're not going to get invested and never get off.
Yep. And that goes hand in hand with what you and I forget if we actually said this outright in the last episode or not. But the whole point of these first 2 episodes specifically is to point out the issues with aeroflight. And I don't know if that's what I was going to say.
Principles of aeroflight.
Right. And I don't know that issues was the right word to use, but it's essentially what is working against my arrow in order to create the need for the rest of the information. Right? This information is so, I don't want to say it is advanced, but we're trying to break it down. So I don't want to call it advanced, but it is so far beyond what the typical person has thought about in the past.
We in it right now.
Oh yeah.
Because see, unfortunately, I mean, you look at all the 10.5, 515, the Raven 500, the Scorpion 480. When you start dealing with aerospeed at that time, all the stuff we talk about is exaggerated.
Yes. Yep, and just like the box truck example we were talking about last week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're driving a box car and a Corvette side by side at 10 miles an hour, chances are you're not going to see much of a difference. But if you speed it up to 80 miles an hour, I promise you that Corvette's going to feel a hell of a lot better to drive down the road than the box truck.
And then 120, you may not be driving.
No, I think the box truck tops out at 92.
I mean, I'll rephrase what I say. A Formula One at 170 miles per hour, 70 to 78% of the energy is used for aerodynamics.
Right. That and
just air resistant.
And that's why I love numbers. It puts things in perspective. You know, 70% is huge. More than half, way more than half of the energy
is
is
only
being wasted on
170
aerodynamics.
miles per hour.
And
500 feet per second is 300 plus miles per hour.
You know, exactly. And Dorge, we've talked about this before, right? A helicopter doesn't fly as fast as an aeroplane. Therefore, an airplane is more aerodynamic than a helicopter. An airplane doesn't travel as fast as a fighter jet. So a fighter jet is more aerodynamic than a jet plane. You know, so it's like, I've pointed this out before, where anything else that flies, we understand that aerodynamics matter. What I don't understand is why it took so long for us to understand that aerodynamics matter in aeroflight.
Because at 260 feet per second, the aerodynamic hindrance of the aircraft is not the dominant factor. At 290, it shows. At 315, it takes over.
Okay.
But at the same time, remember, all this happened around 2006 to 2008.
That's
it
what I was just
actually
about to
hit
ask.
in 2013. Because that everybody bow finally give the actual hunter a bow that shoot over 300 feet per second.
And that explains why my second bow my first bows were both Matthews, but they were all hand-me-downs. My dad bought a Matthews solo cam back in like the 90s. I shot that bow for like the first, 10 years that I was shooting archery. And then I made the mistake of leaving that bow in the trunk of my car one day in the summer and found out that the laminate on the limbs popped. So then my dad he said, oh, okay, fine, here's another one. You know, he gave me his next hand-me-down, and that was a Matthews Outback, I think it was, from like 2003, 2007, somewhere.
Outback. Sounds about right. It should be 1998. That's where Sweetback XT Outback come in. Then you got the Q2 should be coming in. Actually, it was before that. The Q2 coming in 2000. And then you move in all the rest of DXT, then all the way to the Reasons. I think if you want a good Matthew, nothing beats the C7 Extreme, which is the same as a C2 and C3.
Yep, the Z7. And actually, it's funny you say that, because this summer I had an issue with my old bow where it derailed on me, and we couldn't figure out why. It wasn't anything it just happened. I was shooting it for months, and then all of a sudden I go to draw back one day, and it's just poof, and that's it. So I needed to go to a 3D shoot, and it was one where we were starting to film with the channel, and we wanted to interview someone, so I had to be there. And my cousin said, I have an old bow for you to use. Why don't you just shoot that? It was a Matthews Z7. It was about half an inch too long for me on the draw length. And I still shot as if I had been shooting that bow for like a year. It wasn't the best day I ever had, but that bow shot very, very nicely.
You know why in the old days, back in the 1990s all the way to 2000, mid-2000, you know why the single cam bows are not really that great?
Mm-mm.
The strings are not ready.
What do you
Single
mean?
cam bow demands absolute perfection strings.
So the cams, technologically speaking, the cams were ahead of the strings at the time, basically.
Correct, because see that cam demand a string that do not stretch at all.
Gotcha.
Let me just give you my experience. I was shooting at Q2. I walk out to Terry at Archery Custom out of Forest Park with 72 pounds. On that will be 2 days before. That will be September 28th. The day before Christmas, I shot at Well, that's a decent buck. Out of Chaminade, 35 yards, I shoot 6 inch under it. I go back to bring the bow back to Terry. Well, look at it. He said, "Did you twist it?" I said, "No, I don't have a bow press. How did I twist it?" He put on a bow scale. I was putting 59, and the cable was stretched just under 3/16 of an inch.
That's insane.
That's what single cam bow demands. That 3/16 of an inch stretch on the down cable plus some stretch on the long string had dropped close to 15% of the bow's total weight.
That's insane. And it's not, and I understand that the technology wasn't ready, so I can't be too upset about it. But
well, that's the reason, that's, I don't know where to read the case, but if you buy a brand new bow every year or change your string every year, the effect is less. And if you do have a bow press and you don't shoot that much, that's the reason I remember when I shooting the Tiger and the Cuda strings, I learned after 25 shots, I bring it back to the bow shop, I do the bow scale and everything good. Then I do another 25 shot, I put it back. I'm good for the whole year. So
that's
yes,
awesome.
I need to put my 50 to 70 shots into the bow, or else I'm going to see some problem.
Yeah,
But that sort of sucked because every time I do that, I need to readjust my pip sight.
Sure, and I think, and I want to say this cautiously because I don't have any facts to back this up. But I think no matter how much a company pre-stretches strings, I think every string stretches at least a little bit.
Nope, actually, that's no longer true since 2015.
Oh, I love that.
The new string that we make today, if they do everything correctly, you won't see 5,000 of inch stretch. That's the reason when you tune with the new guys like American Bass, Paper Trail, Joey, all the good guys who know what they're doing. I mean, can they make bass strings? Yes. Can they make bass strings? Absolutely. But then they stand behind it. So in most cases, that means you shoot the bow maybe 2 or 3 times. You don't need a bubble band. Those pip sight will stay exactly where you put it.
Okay.
Because when you see the pip sights start turning and stuff like that, that means something is happening to your string. Like,
right.
I just got one of my old friend coming to me that he give his bow to his son, and he can't keep the pip sight correct. I finally asked him, "Hey, didn't I fix that bow in 2019 for you?"
Well, that's the problem. It's the string for 2019.
Because the string will eventually creep, and then they will degrade. Because the Dyneema and Vectran stuff don't work together.
That's awesome.
It's just part of the material,
Yeah.
I mean, you do blend, you put Dyneema, you put Vectran, you put Spectras, you put all those material in it. I mean, they all give you what you need today. Just
sure.
like if you bring your bow, say Minnesota, go to say Florida to do the January shoot, I will guarantee you don't get the bow ready for 2 days, you're not going to shoot worth a shit.
And it's, I learned this the hard way. I think it's important to learn about tuning a bow, how arrows behave, how your bow behaves, maintenance, upkeep. But I have become so much more neurotic ever since I learned about how a bow is set up, how an arrows behave, how you know what I mean? So it's like
your power cycle. What do you think is giving your power cycle to the arrow? The string.
Absolutely.
So let me tell you, if there is anything not needed on the bow, just like what part of you besides your hair you can cut off without any problems? Answer is none. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I think that pretty much should cover what we need to talk to this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one was good. It was a nice straightforward concept compared to last week's.
Because it's all dynamic. This one you have stages, very clean.
Exactly.
Last week they all mingled and they all happened simultaneously. It's not one over the other. All of them are happening. No.
Right.
And the problem is that you don't know which one is dominant. Because you don't know your setup, you don't know your power cycle, you don't know your aerodynamic side, you don't know your FOC, you don't know the construction build. So all of them is simultaneously is not true for, and they are not the same for anybody.
Exactly. And today, conversely, compared to last week's, these are happening consecutively, one after the other, where if you can control the first one, then the effect is a little bit less on the second one. If you can control the second one, it's a little less on the third, and so on. So it compounds, but in a positive way if you can start controlling it from the bow, essentially.
Absolutely. So
All
it's a
right.
good thing. I mean, at least we got the basics, what you call the concept and stages thing into the show. So for what it's worth, take it. I mean, is there more to it? Actually, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, if I do not break it down in this format, you'll be trying to explain brain surgery.
Yeah.
What's the most important part? What is not important?
Right. And exactly. And what are the odds? And am I going to make it? Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to understand that we're really doing our best to keep things simple, keep things short and sweet, give the meat and potatoes of each of the topics, and then now that we've laid the foundation down, we can start jumping into individual pieces, components, concepts, and different things like that.
Again, just like every time we said, if you've got questions, get to Chris, get with me. We'll try to explain the best we could. If multiple people have it, we'll devote time to explain it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I mean, I'm treating it as an academic environment. It's a casual lecture in a way.
Sure.
Until you understand all the fundamentals, it's no point going forward.
I agree completely. So honestly, what I'll probably do is I'm going to listen back to the first episode. I'm going to listen back to this one, and I'm going to see if, as a listener, if there are any questions that come to mind for me, maybe something that we didn't, maybe I'm like, you know what, that was still a little bit too complicated or more complicated than I would have liked. And maybe we'll do a third episode where we kind of bring it all together, or we won't. We'll see where that takes us. But
I think just tidy up unless the question took over.
Yep.
I think our stage is good. But I would like to devote time for anybody who have serious questions. Like, we may not explain it the way they want us to. So
Gotcha.
I would definitely do it for you.
Okay,
Right?
I gotcha. Well, Dorge, thank you so much for your time. It's
You're
a pleasure
welcome.
having you as always. And until next time, remember, success is just a commitment away. Have a great week, man. See you soon.
Okay.
See ya.
Mm-hmm.